Hello there, it's your friend Phil, Project Management Trainer, PMP Exam Coach. Today we've got a question from our student Krishnan on resource calendars. He says, in reference to Acquire Project Team, one of its outputs is resource calendars. Resource calendars is also a major input to time, where you've got estimate activity duration, estimate activity resources, and develop schedule, and also in cost, determine budget. So the question is, if resource calendars is available during executing, since it's an output, how can one refer this document or refer to this document at the time of planning? Does this mean the process groups are not linear? That is, can I pick up any executing process and perform that process ahead of any planning processes based on the situation? On a second thought, I feel I need at least a baseline to kickstart executing. And if so, I will need resource calendars to arrive at a cost baseline, determine budget. So in short, I need a resource calendar for my baseline, but actually resource calendars is available only in the executing process group. Also, if I assume that resource calendars is in infant stage at the time of planning with bare minimum data available, then during executing, should not the resource calendar be part of project documents updates rather than seed as a separate output? So, Krishna, the answer to your question is all of the above and many more. First of all, the process groups are not linear. You're right. There's a lot of overlap with the process groups. Take a look at page 51 in the PMBOK guide. Secondly, it's a bit of the chicken and the egg thing. I need to plan. I need resources to plan, but I acquire my resources as part of executing. You see, for that reason, I would actually advise you to watch my video that talks about process groups overlapping, and it talks about process groups not being linear. If you search the Praizion videos, you'll find it. It's got a similar image to that of page 51, but instead of the project starting at the beginning of initiating, I show that there's a lot of overlap, and it's somewhere in the middle of all of those overlaps that you really are conceptually putting your charter together. Because in a lot of instances, when we put in a bid, we've already done a lot of the planning up front. You don't put in a bid with a half-baked estimate, do you? You want to do a solid estimate before you bid, especially if it's a fixed price contract. What does that tell you? Even before initiating is conceived, in many an instance, you have actually started planning. But let's explore this whole idea about resource calendars just to be on the same page here. So resource calendars, as you can see from our book, ITTO Science, which is available on Praizion.com. Also check out the video on ITTO Science. But you can see that resource calendars is indeed an input, or an output, I should say, from acquire project team and conduct procurements. So it first of all comes from acquiring the project team and conducting procurements. So think about it. If you're working on a project, when do you really acquire the project team? Is it at the end of planning? It's not at the end, in quote, of planning, because you need your project team, you need the engineers, the coders, the testers. You need them to put realistic estimates into your schedule, into your budget. So you have actually already started acquiring some of the project team. Maybe not every single person, but some of the people. So acquire project team actually would have overlapped with some of the stuff that happened in initiating, or some of the partial stuff that's already in planning, you see. So you could plan, the second you get your charter, you could go into planning mode and do a rough estimate of how many people or who you need to help with your plan. You see, now when you acquire your project team, you begin to have an idea of the availability, but you don't know the availability for sure until you acquire them. And that's why when we think about project management, it's important that we don't think linearly. We cannot afford to think, oh, I'm done with planning, then no, there's a lot of overlap. So there's overlap in the people you're bringing on board to plan. There's overlap as you're acquiring the team bit by bit. I could be in a acquire project team for 5 months on a project, acquiring different team members in an iterative and overlapping fashion with everything else. So as I get an understanding for sure of who those people are, well, of course, I would need to update those resource calendars. Think about it. In Microsoft Project, you've got those resource calendars. They're updated with reality. You don't leave your resource calendar static, right? So common sense says, I've got my schedule baseline, but I also have my project schedule. In order to work my project schedule, I need to update my resource calendar with reality so that I know for sure when those folks are available. And if they're not available, as a good PM in control schedule, I take action. The other place where resource calendars comes from is when you acquire staff or staff augmentation from outside of the firm, or you're working with a supplier, a vendor, a subcontractor, a contractor. You also get resource calendars that reflect their availability after contract award. That's why we've got that in conduct procurement, where contract award happens. Now let's think about where resource calendars go. As you rightfully said, resource calendars, as you can see from the ITTO Science book, it goes to estimate activity resources, estimate activity durations, develop schedule, determine budget, and develop project team. So why do we need it in develop project team? Well, we need to know when to send these folks for training, when to send them for team building, when to work with them in a collaborative fashion to get them out of the storming stage. You remember the 5 stages of team development? Well, sometimes we need to put in effort to get people out of that stage, and we need to know when they are available so that we put them in some team building or training, some other team activity. So resource calendars comes from here and goes to these places. Now, of course, you can see that these are scattered across the board. Estimate activity resources, estimate activity duration, develop schedule, and determine budget. These are all in planning. But you see that develop project team is in executing. So you use this to feed any processes that you're working on where the information is available. It's possible you develop a schedule without having a definitive resource calendar from a particular resource by name. You see, these resource calendars, we strive to get a resource calendar that's by name, not a generic title, not, oh, the coder's resource calendar. No, no, no. It has to be Jack or James or John's resource calendar that's by name. So that's what we strive to do. We want to get everyone's resource calendar so that we know everyone's availability in reality. See? Now, I'll show you another excerpt from one of our books that is on the PMP exam data flows, also on Praizion.com. And this is from the Project Procurement Management Summary data flows. So in procurement management, we know the flow. We've got our project management plan that goes into plan procurement management. And we know that plan procurement management feeds conduct procurements with a procurement statement of work, source selection criteria, procurement management plan, procurement documents, and make or buy decision. But really what I'm after here is to show you the relationship between conduct procurements and estimate activity resources. So take a look here. We've got resource calendars, which comes from conduct procurements. When is conduct procurements happening? It could actually be happening right alongside or even before you estimate activity resources. You see, you could be doing these in parallel. So as you're trying to decide how many resources do we need or how many resources do we have to get the work done based on the contract, you need to be thinking about these resource calendars from the vendor, from the contractor, from the seller, whoever that person is that's lending you some muscle on the project. You see? Then you also get these resource calendars from acquiring your project team. And you could be acquiring your project team as you're going through estimate activity resources. Do you see the whole idea? You could be in a parallel process scenario with conduct procurements and estimate activity durations, and also with acquire project team and estimate activity resources. I mean, there's all sorts of overlaps that could be happening throughout the project, if you get what I mean. Okay, so this is not to say there's only one way of it happening. There's several ways. Now, to close, I just want to call your attention to that video one more time about how process groups are not linear. In reality, when we think about the passage of time, okay, on a project, so let's call this time. When you think about the passage of time on the project, when that bid hits your desk, what is the first thing, or when that request for bid hits your desk, the first thing you do is you're going to take a look at it and you're going to plan, right? So you're going to carry out some sort of planning. Is that the only place you plan? No. You see, your planning, if you're thinking about the passage of time and the end of the project, your planning does not end there. Your planning is going to continue for a long way throughout the project, like when you win the bid and throughout the project. So let's say you win the bid around here. You don't stop planning there. You fine-tune your plan until you get to this point right here. So I would say think about planning efforts as being like that. And then when you win that bid, depending on how your firm conducts business, let's say around here, the project charter is developed and there's some form of initiating taking place. But you see, you didn't start planning today, you started planning yesterday. You see? Now, when we talk about executing, carrying out the work, you could think about executing, of course, like that throughout the project. You could think of monitoring and controlling things all throughout the project pretty much. And then when you think about closing, you could think about closing out the project and there's overlap to close it out. Now, this is an alternate view of page 51 in the PMBOK guide. Page 51 in the PMBOK guide is very different than what I'm trying to show you here. I'm trying to show you this so that you will think out of the linear box. So page 51 kind of looks at initiating like this, planning like this, executing somewhat like this, monitoring and controlling, and then closing. But I choose to look at it differently because if you put in a bid, it's different, right? There's a lot of overlap. So I quite agree with page 51, except there's a lot of planning that happens far on the front end, even before the contract is won, if you're dealing with an external source. If you're internal, if it's an internal project, then of course it will just be like that. You see what I mean? It would be like that if you're, in an internal project. But if you're talking about where you put a lot of effort into bids and stuff, it's different. And that's where the whole idea of contractors, subcontractors, resource calendars, and all that stuff comes up. Okay? So those of you watching, don't forget you can get these data flows and also these flows as well from different places on our videos. If you go through some of our videos and on Praizion.com. But I hope that helped to explain your question, Christian, and thank you very much for asking it. Wish you all the best in your studying, and I know you're going to crush it. Bye for now.